to episode 6 of Coral Kelp and Community. Today, we're going to Australia to talk about baby hammerhead sharks, the importance of raising awareness, and how to take care of yourself when doing challenging environmental work. All right, so today, our guest is James Graham, who goes by Graham. And I found him on Instagram, so that's easy
Mm.
to remember. Uh, but I we originally came into contact because I was not only just taken by his beautiful underwater photography, but also the message on one of his captions. Uh, there was a beautiful hammerhead shark. I believe it was a scalloped hammerhead.
Yeah,
Um,
scalloped hammer, baby scalloped hammerhead something.
yeah,
Yeah,
a little baby, and um, he had this beautiful imagery. And in the caption, it was talking about all of the issues that sharks face. And the question of, is this shark in the footage even still alive today? I made a comment about how we have to take care of ourselves when we do this kind of work. And it is very hard for people doing this kind of work to essentially witness a slow violence. And when policy is not on your side, when you're fighting for all of this, um, it can be really challenging. And
yeah,
there's all kinds of ways to cope. And, sometimes you just need to cry, sometimes you need to have a dark sense of humor. Um, but what's really critical is remembering that you're not alone,
yeah.
that there are many people doing this work. Uh, so, what can you share about how you cope with this work when you have those days where you come
Oh,
out of the water just in anguish from what you've seen?
well, yeah. Firstly, thank you for having me and thank you for reaching out,
Of
right?
course.
So I know. To be honest, I mean, starting from the top, you read the caption, and a lot of, I guess, my consideration about what I do is sharing a message that is palatable to people, but then you're kind of balancing, what do I actually feel about this? Like, am I angry? Like, is there a message here that is much bigger, that I can talk about? Um, and so, yeah, a lot of the time is spent considering what the message is. And I guess the sad reality maybe of, you know, social media or just bad news in general is it travels terribly. People don't want to read bad news. Um, so I guess my battle really is one. I mean, you mentioned, like, obviously we spoke on Instagram and utilizing the reach that you can access a lot of people, but also, you're not here to anger people and target people, because ultimately we're all kind of victims of someone else's decision in this. We're not decision makers, unfortunately, but we can educate. So I guess I do a lot of study myself, and that's how I get into reading policy and just generally trying to keep my finger on the pulse. But in doing so, you expose yourself to really, really dark literature, and people don't like it. So it's a really difficult balance, and I think that one in particular, in which you reached out, meant a lot to me, because you read the caption, which is somewhat rare, um, but it was something I was very passionate about, um, and it's not always the way. Sometimes you do just have to enjoy what you're doing, but we're in an environment where there's, I would call it 99 issues for any like one happy piece of news. I'm exaggerating, right? Okay, it's 9,999 bad bits of news to one good bit of news, right? The ocean is in a bad way. I think it was like Jacques Cousteau was like, the ocean won't die, it's just getting sicker every day. It's so true. We're just on the front line. So this is my hobby. It's not my job. Um, so yeah, it's one of those things where I still have to be able to enjoy this. And part of the enjoyment is education and speaking to people like you, where we get a good connection and you reinforce those beliefs by finding people that believe strongly as well and are willing to do something about it. So yeah, I think you touched on this. Is like there's lots of avenues on which you can go, um, but there's no right answer. Unfortunately, we're trying to undo evil, and there's a lot of ways to try and do that. When unfortunately we're not winning, but we've got to, that means there's opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what
That was a long amble.
no, that
Sorry.
was great. We covered a lot of important ground, that um and I think especially speaking to the self-care aspect, whether someone has been working on environmental and ocean issues for years or if they're just coming to it fresh, um,
Yeah,
remembering that you can enjoy this. You can just
yeah,
bask in the beauty of what you're seeing, uh, and how critical it is to find other people who are doing the same work, who love the same things, because it's
yeah,
really reinforcing when you have that sense of community because I mean, when you feel alone facing these issues, ooh,
mm,
ooh, that's that's awful. That's really defeating. But yeah,
yeah,
and to jump off of what you mentioned before about this being your hobby, um,
yeah,
I think that's a really critical thing for people to realize too, is that you don't have to make a cause your full-time career. You can have a day job and it can just be a job, because that's
yeah,
not all of who you are. Your hobby is reaching, thousands of people. You can see it, all the views on Instagram. Like the shark
yeah,
video I looked at was already over 12,000 views. And
mm,
that caption, people were responding. So you are reaching people and you are raising awareness, and everyone should know that, like, you don't have to have the like I mean, I kind of don't like the term dream job anyway. Like, when you dream, do you really dream of work? Like, isn't
it's
the
true.
point of society to work
Yeah,
less? But, you know, setting that rant aside for a second, like, you
yeah,
can do things and make a big impact without it being your full-time job.
yeah. Yeah, well, there's a few things to touch on there, and I think maybe we can just describe what that video is really, because so what happened was a couple of months ago, maybe it's like 6 months ago, um, a school of baby hammerheads turned up at Burleigh Heads, which is southeast Queensland. It was so accessible. So when I say accessible, you could just walk in off the beach and there's baby scalloped hammerheads, right? So they're critically endangered. It's this is a freak event in anyone's books. Um, it's a beautiful event, but one of them in particular had a fishing hook running from it already. So this is a baby, and it had a fishing hook and a line trailing from it. And so I asked around, and I guess initially not many people had noticed it, but then um, once you see things like that, you can't unsee it. And so you kind of like take away a bit of that beauty. Um, it's an amazing event, but somewhat, you know, if you start to see things that are not right, and you've seen other animals injured, for however many other dives I've done, um, it just you're heightened, your awareness is heightened of things that don't look right anyway. Um, anyway, it quickly circulated. There's everyone's talking about it. That there's apparently a few of them had like fishing hooks and lines through them. And it's also a reminder that their shark nets just kind of very near, and drumlines very near to where this event is actually taking place. So the immediate concern, I guess, from a shark lover is, what is the plight of these baby hammerheads? Like, what are they facing? And the answer, unfortunately, is immense threat, right? So they're not protected. They are a target species under the Fisheries Act in Australia. So people don't know that. Like, we are actively, you can go and fish hammerheads.
Mm.
It's a really weird sentence to say, but it's true. And so we still have shark nets and we have drum lines. And these are like, I don't want to misquote this, but they're 70 something year old practices that have not really been changed. And so I guess for your audience, a drum line is a baited hook. A drum line is a fancy way of saying we bait hooks on our beaches. So big sharks come in and eat the bait. So if you think, like, how would I stop a shark coming to my beach? Would you bait a hook on the beach? It's mental. And once you think, people don't know this, and it's not the fault of the beachgoer. It's the fault of people that know that this doesn't work. And so, unfortunately, I guess we put ourselves on the side of, can we do something about it? So, in sharing that video, I wanted to kind of convey that, are these sharks still alive? And the unfortunate news in that is that a lot of, and again, I don't want to be misquoted here, but there were reports coming in, and photos being shared of baby hammerheads' heads that had been chopped off up and down the coast from like near Burleigh Heads, right? So where this happened. And so other people reached out to me and said, hey, this is a thing, we've witnessed this elsewhere. What we do is, if we find schools of hammerheads, we don't tell anyone, because it gets into the news and then the fishermen pick it up and it's just free food, right? You just go and sweep them up. So because hammerheads school, the issue is that once you find one of them, you find 100 of them. And so, yeah, you can put two and two together. These are not facts, it's not immediately did that shark that I swam with get killed 5 minutes later, but it's a valid question. Um, so yeah, I think it's just, I don't know. I think I put myself in a position of, is it a message that I can research, and I have a very strong feeling about it, but like, is there anything behind this? And then once I've got the footage, like I said, I took this sort of 6 months ago, and then I only posted it recently. But I went through this battleground of emotion, and this is something that, again, I'm rambling, but going back to what you said about how you look after yourself,
Mhm.
is I did not enjoy swimming with them because of researching what I was at the time. So yes, there's fishing hook trailing from them, and it's a baby. Like, that really upsets me. It was a circus. There was like 100 people in the water at one time. It's not a beautiful event to me. Um, and again, to that's not to separate, like, this is an amazing event and people are able to swim with hammerheads and, like, be aware of them. That is an amazing message. Um, but I didn't see any kind of beauty in it. And so once I kind of saw these photos of the baby hammerheads, and I'm not obviously not going to share them, but it kind of validated, like, the final nail in the coffin for me to make a post so forward, because it makes me sad. Like, I want people to enjoy hammerheads, and people go, oh, this was a beautiful experience. I swam with them. My family have been so happy to swim with these babies, right? I want that for people,
Mhm.
but it's not the end of the story. And I would like people to be aware of the rest of that story, which is, these have to swim away and migrate and grow and eat, but who knows whether they do, you know? Um,
Yeah.
that's why they're critically endangered. Yeah, there you go. So I could go on and
No, I know. I completely understand. I there's actually a special place in my heart for hammerheads as well, and
Mm,
uh how the battleground of emotions and how you chose to share the message that of what they face, I think is really important because, like you said, there's a lot of bad news for every little tidbit of good news, and
mm,
you're specifically making the choice to not share the photos of decapitated hammerheads, which I
yes.
appreciate very much. Um, just
Well, I confirmed them with a
right, right,
few
right.
science, like marine biologists and things, just to make sure that I'm not going off on one.
Right, right. But
And reading the Fisheries Act, that was huge.
oh yes, yeah. And and so like you're doing the research, you're providing actual facts for people so that they can know what's going on,
Yeah,
but you're also inviting them in, right? Like the first thing
yeah,
they see is this beautiful video. And I think that's a really important strategy because, like you said, nobody wants the doom and gloom. And if
no,
you can right? Like, we have enough of that, and it's really hard to handle all the time, and so if you can see something alive
mm,
and moving the way it should move and just in its environment, it gives you, I think, a moment of pause of like, "Mm, that feels good to see, and
mm,
I wanna keep seeing that." "Oh, what do
yes,
I need to do? Oh, the Fisheries Act needs an amendment? Okay,
hmm
great." And of course, I don't live in Australia, um, but maybe I look into the Fisheries Act of my country. Maybe I look into the
yeah,
policies here. Maybe I check to see if there's something I can vote on or even just protest. Like, suddenly, I'm curious about what's happening because of
yeah,
even the harsh juxtaposition, the contrast between the beautiful imagery and the written facts. Like,
yeah,
I clearly thought it was a good way to start a conversation because you started a conversation with me. Um,
yeah. And it hits the, and maybe my target is, you know, there's an element of clickbait, right? And I'm okay with clickbait when I'm tricking people into the right conversation.
I
Um,
like that.
yeah, because people go, oh, look, that's such a beautiful video. But what they've done is enabled because they missed the message, but what they've done is enable more people to potentially get the message.
Mhm.
So it's not that they're invalid. I understand people don't read captions or, they just like the video. That's totally okay. But what it does do is enable that message to get further. And I'm okay with that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, clickbait is an insult on what I'm trying to do, but it is the strategy that I use there, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I completely get it because it's I mean, maybe you don't have to say clickbait, maybe you can just say, how you're delivering a message.
Yeah,
Um,
a hook.
the hook, oh no.
That's pun intended.
No, that
Sorry,
was
I
great.
walked into that.
I'm a lover of bad puns. Um, but yeah, I mean, and one of the things I was going to ask you about is, what you hope to achieve, not just for scalloped hammerheads, but um, for all of the species and that you
Yeah,
post and for the oceans in general through your work. And certainly you're reaching a large audience. You are starting conversations. And
yeah,
I, in my actually very recent experience, when you go into a field and you learn all these things and you get somewhat specialized, it's really easy to forget how important it is to raise awareness about whatever it is you're
yeah.
studying because you start learning from all these experts and you're like, oh, all of these papers are published, oh, all of this, all of that, and
Mm.
at a certain point you can you can forget that you've gone down a rabbit hole that not everyone has gone down, and that awareness
Yeah.
is still a really critical thing. I mean, I just read
Yes.
that like 40 years ago, like less than half of the population of the world had heard the term climate change or global warming.
Oh,
And that's kind of
yeah.
mind-blowing, you know? So yeah, I mean, you can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know where we can go anywhere with that because I think it's I I guess my message would be about, yes, you said about reading the policy and education, but that I think the important aspect is to remember that the people I guess I'm trying to reach are not to blame.
Mhm.
And that is a really interesting, at least to me, I find that like the critical piece of information is that you want people to get angry about these things, but you also want it to be from their perspective because I can't make people care about sharks, right? Because they're scared of the water because they don't want to get eaten by a shark. To be absolutely clear, neither do I. But it's not something, if you don't want to get eaten by a shark, don't get in their habitat. And even that sounds like I'm being too strongly worded, I think. But I would say education is the key. Um, we are kind of told a message from the media, which is like sharks are bad, shark attack this, someone died swimming near a shark. You see what I mean? Like
Mhm.
the message is so unbelievably against sharks. And I've just picked one animal, right? They're all the way I think of it is everything that swims in the ocean right now is endangered. That's how I believe it to be. You kill sharks, you kill everything underneath it. And it's getting extremely unhealthy, the amount of sharks there are in the ocean. And people just don't know it.
Mhm.
Um, so I guess I've got friends that are studying it directly. So they're actually monitoring shark populations, or they're setting up kind of camera traps on reefs for years and seeing what that population density does. And the answer pretty much unanimously is decreasing. So that's not just in Australia, that's a global thing. And obviously you mentioned about global warming, but the term I guess that's beginning to come into character is global boiling.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's more of an essential like use of terminology because it's quite likely, and again this sounds like I'm too negative, but it's quite likely that we'll see the end of the ice caps pretty soon. And with that means a significant rise in ocean temperatures. You've got less kind of sun's rays being reflected back out to space, right? It's exponential. Um, but we don't know what that looks like. We're just told that, there's bushfires or something. Um, Another way I would phrase this is, you've got yourself a super problem. It's a problem that is so complex and it's so far reaching with so many people. We're trying to save the world for future generations. We don't really know as a species how we're going to do that. But until you kind of address that problem, you can't solve a problem unless you address it accordingly. And I guess unfortunately we are not addressing the problem. And so part of my ambition, I guess, is to get those conversations going, albeit in an absolutely minuscule capacity. But I believe it. And I think that's important. If you research it and people challenge you and you end up being wrong, that's still okay because you're addressing the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, maybe just took a complete meander into random ideas there,
No,
but
no, no, that was
yeah,
that was totally it. I was like, what are you trying to achieve? And you told me, and,
yeah,
um I mean,
it's
it
hard.
is it is really hard, but, like, starting the conversations, um, especially for people who are just are unaware because, I mean, news around the world maybe isn't
Mm.
informing us of certain important things. It's nobody's fault necessarily that they don't know what's going on with sharks or with climate change. Um, you know, you have to be almost really active in it to
Mm.
learn that, and most people don't know that they need to actively be looking for this information if they want it, because a lot of us think we're getting what we need from the news when we're not,
Yeah.
or from like, like, oh well, looking at what you need to look at to vote and that kind of thing. But like you said, it's a very complicated issue, and so a lot of these things require deeper dives, which is why we're here today. um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I always ask, or at least I try to always ask my guests this one final little question here. Little question.
Hmm.
Uh, what do you think is the most pressing ocean issue, and how can listeners be involved? And you can say for Australia or globally how people can be involved either way.
Um, I think I've already addressed it with this. I think it's such an immense problem that education is probably my sweeping answer. I think the idea of I spoke about I've spoke quite a lot about
Mhm,
sharks because of if you kill an apex predator,
mhm,
you destroy everything below it through the food chain. And I won't go into that, but I guess it's yeah, the way I think about it is no one in their right mind would want the ocean and everything in it to die. So educating yourself is one thing, and I don't think everyone's necessarily got the capacity to do that, or the time, or the care, or
mhm,
whatever. But I think spreading, if you're in a position where you're able to educate yourself and get that message going, not being kind of afraid to do so. Um, the way I think of my Instagram, it's again like it's a small piece of this conversation. Um, but if I'm going out and watching animals die, I am okay with telling people that happens. It's not my fault. Um, and that's something that I find like really important. All of us that trying to kind of convey a message of change, it's sad, and we get an affinity and like an alliance between us of trying to do the right thing. But you just need as many people to be doing that as possible. We're not going to solve it, and we're not, you know, we don't have enough decision making power, unfortunately, to stop climate change. But if enough people start talking about it and are aware of it globally, then that changes the conversation, hopefully. Again, I sound pessimistic, but
I mean,
you,
you're
yeah,
optimistic enough to try, right? And
that's true.
and that
That's
is,
true.
I mean, that's really critical, because I think that's where a lot of people find hope, is in doing the work. Like there's that
Yeah,
expression, think globally, act locally. Because even even small efforts like community gardens or running for city council, and increasing the safety of bike lanes, like all of those things really do add up when you're trying to get towards systemic change. And when other people see you making that effort, a lot of times they feel like they can make an effort too. It's
yeah,
inspiring. Even in the face of existential crisis. um
yeah.
but yeah.
The way I think the way I see this is we're all facing existential crisis, or like, we're facing a global crisis, right? It might not be too extreme to suggest that this is apocalyptic. Like, we just don't know, right? Global warming, no ice caps, has never ever happened through humanity.
Mhm.
So, again, it sounds inflammatory, to say this could be apocalyptic in terms of like decimation of our food stocks, right? But I'm not the only victim here. We are all victims. Um, so being ahead of the curve, maybe, and educating and trying to spread awareness might get somewhere towards a solution that is not apocalyptic. but
Yeah,
but you have to admit that there's a problem first. And unfortunately, just with so many policies, there's too much money involved, and there is no problem being addressed. I mean, climate change is not. Though I saw something recently that was like, don't be fooled about climate change deniers. They know that climate change is real. They're just profiteering. So it's not that they're stupid, it's that they profit from ignoring it. And that's a really important distinction. You're battling people who are making a profit from terrible, terrible things, and we're just trying to stop it. So unfortunately, it's an uphill battle, but
it is.
that's it.
It is a
I
battle.
believe it.
Yeah, and at this point, even pretty much every oil and gas company has openly admitted that climate change is a thing and that they have caused it. Like it's just on
Yeah,
their
well, they've
websites.
known it forever.
Yeah, like you could just pick one, Chevron, Exxon, Valero, pick one. It's on their websites. They're like, okay, after all these years of like, no, no, no. Um, but
But they'll only be saying that because they're redirected into like electricity or something, which is utilizing all of the stock they've built up and piled it into something else, right? So
totally, totally.
yeah,
But yeah,
again, don't quote me on that, and BP come and assassinate me or whatever.
I don't think you're the first to say that. But yeah, no,
Don't know who's listening.
you never know. We all know what happens to James Graham if one
That's it.
morning
Yeah,
he doesn't show up to work. Um,
yeah,
so on that happy note of assassination, no, I
yeah,
do
yeah.
I really want to thank you for coming on the show and for continuing to raise awareness about ocean issues and to continue to try to start those conversations with people. Um, and and also I think you've emphasized a few times that it's for anyone listening, it's not your fault, right? We
Yeah,
were all born into a system
absolutely.
we did not create, uh, and we can change it together. And it's going to be slow and it's going to be uphill, but we can do it. And
Yeah,
don't beat yourself up
absolutely.
for not living a perfectly eco-friendly life because the system we're in won't let you do that.
And again, my justification for this is it it's allowed to make you sad and angry, but you just have to remember that isn't your fault.
Hmm.
Like I see a lot of really, really bad things on my dives, and they're problems that can really hurt you. But you have to remember that you are not, fighting against that. You aren't the one causing that pain. You're just the one who's like witnessing it. And so what you do with that education is what you choose, I guess. But it's, we all suffer. It's
Hmm.
just unfortunately some of us see a bit more of it. And yeah, then you decide what you do with that information, I guess.
Exactly. You decide what you do with the information. It's a good note.
Yeah.
Um, well, thank you again so much. Uh,
Yes, thank you. No, thank
I'm
you for having me. It's a great conversation.
Oh yeah, it was a pleasure. We should do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us today. Are you a shark lover and want to make a difference? Join our Share Shark Love campaign on social media by sharing your shark art with a caption including fun facts. And subscribe to this show to never miss a wave. Catch you next time.